Welcome to the Ginn Library Book series. We're delighted you're here on a warm Friday afternoon. There's a fan. I'll try to turn it a little bit during the talk. You can mix it up a bit. We're delighted to have Professor deWaal here. Hi guys. There's some seats maybe in front here. I think this is a class just being released. Anyway, we're delighted to have Professor deWaal here. I was with a student yesterday who pronounced that this guy was the real deal. And I thought, well, that's fitting because his book that he'll be discussing today is entitled The Real Politics of the Horn of Africa, Money, War, and the Business of Power. And we're going to have Bridget Conley. Bridget is the research director at the World Peace Foundation. Bridget Conley Zilkich is going to introduce Professor deWaal. Everybody found a spot? There's a couple here. And I'll bring you some chairs.
Can I sit by Bridget?
Yes.
I'll be vacation. I'm just going to be rotating here, there. So, Alex asked me to say a few words, and so I thought that I would start by pointing out to you that a single author publication by Alex deWaal in the book form is actually a somewhat rare event. We're quite privileged to be here to hear from him what it's all about. To double check that recollection of his publications was true, I scrolled through the 20 pages listing his publications, which we still need to update on an almost weekly basis. And it is indeed true. I think, Alex, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's Famine That Kills in 1989, which was one of the first publications, or at least in the recent era, on Darfur, and one of the few crucial sort of intellectual reviews of recent history that was available when the conflict really burst onto the public scene in 2003. 1997, Famine Crimes, which I will admit to have been quite impressed by as I was writing my dissertation, not that long ago, at the time it wasn't very long ago, and AIDS and Power in 2006. So Alex's single author publications of this sort of depth and complexity have not been as common as his mass of publications. And I think we're in for a treat when we hear him describe the intellectual theorization and depth of knowledge that is found in it. As a very brief introduction, though, I wanted to do almost a haiku introduction of his biography by just listing some of the titles that he has had. The first thing is to remember not to confuse him with Tourism Tropical North Queensland Chief Executive Officer, which is another Alex deWaal. As far as we can tell, it's the only other Alex deWaal in the world, right? Just the one?
There's a South African wine grower as well.
Oh, wine grower. Well, in the interest of slightly mocking him, I thought I'd bring up the tourism executive. His other titles: activist, writer, researcher, mediator, writer on humanitarian and development issues, human rights advocate, Sudan scholar. Now here's the range of Sudan ones. Sudan expert, seasoned Sudan expert, and from the less appreciative, so-called Sudan expert. That was a gift from people that I think Alex would return in kind, and with more graciousness. In a British tone, and somehow the insults sound lovely. I first met Alex, I think it was 1999, at a workshop that I was a part of. It was funded through Soros Foundation in New York. And he came to speak, and it was the week or the session after we had a journalist who had also just published a book on Sudan. He came to speak and presented one of the most dismal pictures of the conflict that I recall ever hearing. And everyone, so when Alex spoke, everyone started off by saying, okay, Sudan expert, we've heard that the situation is intractable, that the violence shows no sign of abating, and that there's no hope, that the politics is stuck, the use of violence is stuck, and there's no sun sort of on the horizon. And I remember Alex at that point said, oh, that's not at all how I see it. and responded by giving us a much more nuanced political understanding of where the shifts actually were happening and what might be expected outcomes. Not necessarily all of them positive, sort of the positive takeaways or the negative takeaways, but at least an understanding of where and how things were moving when they did move. So what I'm curious in, and imagine everyone is whether that optimism of sorts still retains as he introduces us to the political marketplace in Sudan today.
Thank you. So here it is. Here's the book. It's been a long time coming, and I'll be signing copies for those of you who want to buy it at the Farris Centre immediately afterwards. So let me talk about this a little bit about this book, and let me start with the cover, which I'm rather pleased with actually. I rather like it. And let me structure this presentation by going through the elements that are there, starting with real politics. And there's a very pithy definition of real politics by Lenin. Who did what to who? That's his definition of politics, and it's terrific. In fact, it's the basis of a philosophical work on politics by Raymond Geuss, which is called The Philosophy of Real Politics, from which I borrowed at least that part of my title. This is not the politics of political science. This is not the politics of the long-term projects of building institutions, etc. This is the real, what I call the real transactional day-to-day politics of who does what to whom. The politics of violence, also the politics of solving problems, the politics that is described by historians, and I'd like to think of history as being the fundamental method. Then we get on to the Horn of Africa. There's a map of the Horn. A few things about the Horn, just by way of preface. The Horn, when I started studying the Horn, had three big countries. The little enclave of Djibouti, put that on one side, had three big countries, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Now, de facto, it has six. Sudan and South Sudan, Ethiopia and Eritrea, Somalia and Somaliland. So three countries that became six. And there are all sorts of other territorial reconfigurations that could happen. And those shifts point us to the fact that the way in which countries, nations, states are demarcated or delineated on maps doesn't really correspond to the real flows of power and the real transactions of politics. And then I would like to think of how one could envision the politics of the region in the graphics of a map. And I like to think of it as in an organic way, as trees growing, their branches spreading, and maybe those trees perhaps withering and dying at different times. So a very sparse map of political networks, political patronage in the 1980s, growing denser, but then some of the trees withering or being felled, and others sprouting up with roots in different places, with branches reaching into different places. And then a note about the horn. There's no agreed definition of the Horn, and the Horn is not a term that is used by the people themselves. No one says, I'm from the Horn of Africa, or I'm a citizen of the Horn, in the way that people say, I'm from Africa, or indeed I'm from Southern Africa or West Africa. It doesn't happen. The Horn is really there to designate places that cause trouble for the rest of the world. The term the Horn was first used in the English language, at any rate, after the opening of the Suez Canal, when suddenly, the great artery of British imperial trade passed through the Suez Canal, and therefore through the Red Sea, through this little gap here. And so all these places suddenly became incredibly strategically important to the world powers, and there was their own scramble for control of this area. It was an area also that became strategic during the Cold War, during the Arab-Israeli wars, and is becoming so again. But the Horn really designates the rest of the world is interested in some trouble that is going on here. Let me move on. So this was the cover of the book, Money, War, and the Business of Power. And then we talk about money and war. The cover that the publishers pushed me to have was this, which is a much more conventional portrayal of what war is about. I'm glad to say I prevailed, and I'm glad to say they very graciously agreed that this was the right way to approach it. I saw guns really as being the symptom, money and the resources and the flows of money, the transactions over money being actually much more fundamental to the way in which politics, real politics, is transacted in this region and indeed beyond. I'll get to the business of power later on. Let's put that on one side for a few moments. So I've been working in this region since the 1980s, and trained as an anthropologist and serving as a practitioner. The key concepts that I want to use and that I develop here are not concepts drawn from political science. They're concepts drawn from the political vernacular, from what is actually used by the men, and they're almost all men, who transact power in this region. And the three key concepts that I utilise are ones that are there in the everyday. There's the political market in the Sudanese vernacular, Suq as-siyasi. There's the political budget in a near pun, Sanduq as-siyasi. The political market refers to the price of loyalty, the going price for renting a militia or renting the political allegiance of any provincial or indeed metropolitan political chief or wheeler-dealer. And a few years ago, when I was serving with the African Union high-level panel on Sudan, and I would walk into the office of the chief of security, a rather disagreeable man called Salah Ghosh, and I would ask him, so what's the price of a militia in Darfur this week? And without blinking an eye, he would tell me. And he would tell me why it had gone up or why it had gone down, what it was determined by, and why it was that the Darfurians were more honest about the price they were charging than the Southerners, who were, in his view, overcharging for their allegiance. You asked him about, I never did ask him about institution building or state building. It wouldn't have made sense to him. What made sense to him was what he did on an everyday basis. And the chief negotiator for the Sudan government at the peace talks in Darfur, a fellow called Marzoub al-Khalifa, was known in popular parlance in Sudan as the Jalaba politician. The Jalaba referring to those traders, those retail traders who trade in small items, soap and matches, because his job as the chief negotiator in Darfur was not to negotiate an overall deal. It was to buy up the individual members of the other delegations one by one at the cheapest possible price, which he was pretty good at doing. He ended up cheating himself by being over mean in that. These people have quite an awareness of what they're doing. They're really quite reflective about this. I wrote an article in which I described the same fellow, Marzoub Khalifa, as a king crocodile. And he, rather reptilian character, I said he was. And when I met him afterwards in his office in the palace in Khartoum, where there was a line of people coming into his office to get their little envelopes of money on their marching orders one by one, a bit like a doctor's surgery. He spoke to me in great detail about what he was offering to everyone. Didn't speak a word about my article until we left, and then he put a big hand on my shoulder and said, "Fair article." They have a sense of humour. Actually, and oddly enough, that little snippet, he died in a car crash a year later, and that little snippet was included. He served in the presidency, and they published a book of tributes, and they included that. This was just a few years ago. The political budget is the money that someone like Mahzoub al-Khalifa, or like Salah Ghosh, or like Siad Barre, the former dictator of Somalia, has in his, and again I say his because they're all men, has in his pocket for dispensing. He doesn't need to account for it to anybody. It is what he uses for political purposes. He may use it to enrich himself, but more likely he uses it to reward his followers. And I emphasize the political market is not a metaphor. It is actually how they do business. It's not a metaphor. And lastly, political business management. Again, I will put that on hold. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. And I would just add that there's a lot of time and effort is spent by political scientists, by the likes of the foreign policy and the Fund for Peace, in their indicators of state fragility, the likelihood of state collapse. The indicators that are used by the men in the region are these. They will say an individual or a country is in trouble because President so-and-so is running out of money, the price of loyalty is rising, and maybe he doesn't have the political skills. Or he sacked somebody who has key political skills. So these are the indicators they use. If we could have if we had the granular information that would allow us to make those same assessments, we have a much better set of early warning indicators instead of these maps covered in red that are produced every year by published every year by foreign policy. And another concept, turbulence. Let's talk a little bit about turbulence. Turbulence is a defining feature, as I see it, of the realities of this part of the world. There's a Sudanese joke that the politics in Sudan changes every week, but you come back after 10 years and it's exactly the same. It's not exactly the same, but it is recognizably the same. Turbulence is a term taken from fluid dynamics. It refers to the fact that it's the properties of a liquid, let's say, or gas, that changes unpredictably, chaotically from one moment to the next, yet maintains its structure over a period of time. Like you turn on the faucet, the flow of water. You don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Every moment is different, but yet you know pretty much what it's going to look like over a longer period of time. The task, as I see it, because this is how they see it, the task of politics in this region is political management and survival. It's not state building, establishing legitimacy, any of that. It's just staying on top. It is not getting from A to B. It's not navigation, it's seamanship. It's keeping your thing afloat. There's a great quote from the anthropologist historian Jane Guy from West Africa, which is putting this in academic terms. The stable, cumulative and systemic concept of institutions becomes blunt and illogical when applied to a reality that seems to those who live it altogether less settled. Africans have to apply reason and judgment to horizons of contingency. And it's basically the skilled political manager is the one who can figure out all these options, who can figure out exactly what's going on, all these variables. And a good politician has to know a lot of people, has to be able to judge a lot of people, has to keep a lot of variables in his mind at the same time. And it's no accident that those who rise to the top are those who have the greatest personal networks and often have an open door policy to allowing members of their own political elites to come and see them at any time. So, PhD students, close your eyes for this bit. This is very politically incorrect. So this is the way, this is what I did. Research question. What's going on? Research hypothesis. Those people know more about it than we did. So don't go with our ideas, find out their ideas. And research method, hang around. You can open your eyes again now, those of you who are on the PhD program. I have been, it's the luxury of being, at a certain stage in your academic career is you can discard a lot of the apparatus that is foisted on younger scholars. So here are four people. Bashir, skilled, very skilled. Lucky as well. He was the guy who, at the time of the popular uprising that overthrew the dictator Jaffrey Mary in 1985, he was the one who personally went and took the written records of the national security and kept them in his personal possession. He's the guy who keeps an open door. Any army officer above the rank of major can come and call on him, no appointment necessary, any evening, apart from Tuesdays and Thursdays. This guy, not very skilled, Salva-Kiir, clumsy, inept. Anyone with, half a political brain could have staved off the political uprising opposition that led to the war in South Sudan. He screwed it up. And everybody knew he was screwing it up at the time, unfortunately, from the head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan. This is Siad Barre. I put him there because he was pretty skilled, but he was facing the problem that the structure of the political market in Somalia did not allow him at any point to be in control of it. It's a very open, internationally integrated market in which money and guns, but principally money can flow in from around the world. He was never able to actually command enough resources, no matter how good his political skills, to buy enough loyalty to keep on top. He managed it for quite some time, 12 years, longer than anyone else, but he couldn't do it. The Somali federal government today faces exactly the same problem. They've set themselves up, put themselves in exactly the same trap of trying to set up a governmental structure that replicates what he was doing, with the same comparable disposition, basket of resources, faced with the fact that the country's political economy is open to all comers because it is the most globally integrated, financially fluid economy possibly anywhere in the world. The remittances flow in, the trade flows in, etc. And Somalis are extraordinarily adept at mobilizing those political resources. Until someone actually decides to go with the flow of the Somali political market rather than resisting it, Somalia is not going to have anything approaching a stable government. That's my prediction, and that is a slightly dismal one. This guy says Afewerki, very skilled. What he managed to do is something that no one else has managed to do, which is he managed to separate the flows of political money from the control of the army. So his generals, until very recently, some of them got finger in corruption, but until very recently, the Eritrean generals did not have their hands in the money pot. The money pot was controlled entirely separately by the Red Sea Corporation, basically an international criminal outfit under its personal control. So skills, lack of skill, unfortunate circumstances. Isaac, you'll recognize this. You drew it. This is adapted from Michael Porter's. Anyone who goes to business school will recognize the 5 competitive forces that shape strategy in the business sector. And a couple of years ago, Isaac adapted it for me for the political market. So you have a basic model for how a political entrepreneur or a political business manager needs to function. But note, it's a political marketplace. These are political projects that these individuals are pursuing. It is not purely greed. This is not just corruption. This is not just material incentives. They are out there for political projects. So that is the business of power. Those political businessmen with their various skill, this model, which I could go into if we have time during the discussion. Now, one thing that isn't on the cover but will appear almost immediately as you open the book is the dedication. It's to this fellow, Meles Zenawi, who died a couple of years ago, whom I had the good fortune to know since his period as a guerrilla back in the 1980s. Now, Meles Zenawi was the leader of the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front and Prime Minister of Ethiopia. I met him in 1988 in the field on the back of a truck, which was basically a traveling seminar. And it was remarkable how the leadership of the EPIDF, or as they then were, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, theorized their revolution and theorized their challenges of government. And it was totally unlike anything else in the region. Meles was unlike any other leader that I've met, or almost any other, in that he would actually read an academic text that you gave him. The other person who's like that is Tufts, but very, very rare to find someone who does that, and would give you a serious critique of it afterwards. His chief of staff, someone who'd spent 16 years at that point in probably seeing more armed combat than almost anyone else on the planet on a quite large scale, said to me, in a way that you would only take seriously from someone with that background, he said, war, he said, is primarily an intellectual activity. And for coming from someone who built up an army from 12,000 to 80,000, who had defeated the largest conventional army on the African continent, that needs to be taken seriously. Meles in power was primarily a theoretician and a practitioner of political economy, trying to build what he called the democratic developmental state. I should say that if you read Joe Stiglitz's book on globalization, he gives a lot of credit to Meles for changing the thinking and changing the policies of the World Bank and indeed the IMF in the 1990s on some key issues. And Meles' starting point was that a small, open economy on the fringes of the world economy will always be so buffeted by economic shocks that it will never really have the chance to develop. Remember that quote from Jane Guy about managing the horizons of contingency. If you're stuck in managing those horizons, you will never get beyond managing those horizons. What he wanted to do was something that has been the sort of the holy grail of state builders, and here I'm putting up a chart from the World Bank, 2011 World Development Report on conflict and fragility and development. What he wanted to do was transition Ethiopia from what he saw as pervasive rent-seeking into a developmental state where it could take off. He said, unless Ethiopia achieves the status of a middle-income country, its national security is always going to be imperiled. National survival is in doubt, not fundamentally for military and security reasons, but for economic reasons. And so he when he took office, convened a small group of people whom he liked to talk with, and we ran a seminar, between 2 and 4 times a year for him, bringing political scientists and others to discuss with him the challenges of the democratic developmental state. And Meles had promised that when he stepped down from office, which in theory was going to be this year, he died before that could happen, that he and I would write our respective sides of this argument. And of course, he was never able to do that, so this is why my book is dedicated to his memory, because that's one of the things I'm trying to do is to give my side of the argument and to give a fair run to his. The disagreement that we had, the creative disagreement we had, was, and I know that Meles actually was coming round to my point of view in his later years, was that initially, at any rate, he saw the rent-seeking, patrimonial, patronage-based order as a relic of the past, something that would inevitably be superseded with economic and political development. My counter critique of this was, I said, your task is actually harder. It's actually a lot harder than you think. Because what you consider, Meles, consider this outdated patrimonial order is actually something rather dynamic. It's actually something that is being updated, is being modernized. The political marketplace, I said, is a modernized, updated, dollarized, integrated, highly dynamic, highly well-funded version of this of this relic, and you need to be very concerned about it. I'll come back to that later. Our biggest practical disagreement, our biggest sort of policy disagreement, was when in 2006 he sent his troops into Somalia to remove the Union of Islamic Courts. Now it's interesting that Mallas, I've written a paper for Mallas in which I argued that the fundamental issues of Somalia would be resolved through an analysis of the financial and the commercial sectors, who owned what and who paid for what. And that the stability would be achieved by giving primacy to the Chamber of Commerce over the trying to get a political settlement among the political elites, who were classic examples of pervasive political rent seekers. And Mellers completely agreed. But he said, for national security reasons, he was going to override his better judgment as a political economist. The national security reasons being the presence of Eritrean trainers among the Somali militiamen in Mogadishu, and he was going to invade. It was a mistake, and he knew the price that he was going to pay, and he recognised the high price as he was paying. Somalia is the most intriguing case in the Horn, and I'll come back to that later. So I wrote this book in the hope of being able to change the way that people think about the Horn. I wrote this book. Actually, let me go back to this, to Mellers for a moment, because there was also one remark that Mellers made when I complained that the work I was doing for the AU panel and mediation in Sudan was getting in the way of me writing this book. He said, this book is more important than you writing a book is more important than you being involved in the mediation. He was unusually amongst those that cadre, someone who took theorization very seriously, and it was in the hope that there would be, primarily in the hope that there would be enough people who were thinking like him among the leadership of the region, among the political intellectuals of the region that I wrote this. The second major audience that I had in mind was students. Was the idea that actually influencing the thinking of people who are at a stage in their career where they are accruing, developing intellectual capital was really important. That this would play out. Because those who are in office, in power, in making decisions are very rarely in learning mode. And I put up this quote from Jean-Marie Gaheno, until a few years, in 2008 he stepped down, I think, the head of DPKO, who, known as a political intellectual, someone who read widely, who admitted, as soon as he got into high office, he almost stopped reading. And he said what he didn't find useful were all the reports from the likes of Crisis Group with their recommendations. And what he didn't find useful were the art books of political science that crossed his desk. He said, what I needed was the fraternal companionship of other actors before me who had had to deal with confusion, grapple with the unknown, and had yet had made decisions. And what I find amongst people like Gaheno, indeed also amongst almost every other leader, and Thabo Mbeki, who is the most widely read of African leaders as an exemplar, what do they read? They read history and they read biography. This is what they're looking for. And if they're reading, and they may be reading, the history of the Roman Empire, they may be reading they may be reading Machiavelli, they may be reading Kissinger. They're looking for people who will allow them to think through the navigation of turbulence, is the way I would like to see it. And I hope that what I would really hope that this book can do is begin to bridge that gap, begin to say, okay, let's begin to think about how those who are trying to steer political ships through these turbulent waters can gain a little bit more opportunity to reflect on exactly what is driving the turbulence and how they may steer it a little bit better. Now, looking ahead, there was a review in The Economist of my book that called it a dystopian vision. I don't like that. I don't think it's dystopian. It's dystopian if you want order and institution. It's dystopian if you are someone whose job it is to pretend that there is a linear path or even a slightly wobbly path, but nonetheless a predictable path towards development and better governance. I think that aspects to the political market that are profoundly problematic. There are also aspects that are rather intriguing. Political markets function in many ways like markets. They have one or two perverse features that I'll come on to. But they have some interesting factors as they become more competitive. One of the factors is that as they become more competitive, the price of loyalty rises. And the ability of those in power to actually command sufficient political budgets to run their governments in the old-fashioned way is more and more challenged. They have trouble staying on top. The barriers to entry are lowered, particularly with urbanization. It used to be the case that you needed to marshal a fairly formidable force, military force or political force, to make your mark, to signal your presence. Now it's really quite a lot easier to do that with smaller quotient of violence, with better communications, etc. And as the market becomes more efficient, it gets more globally integrated. It used to be the case that within the national borders, it was very hard for there to be effective political activity. Now it's very easy. All these borders in the region are permeable. Institutions become instrumentalized. What becomes most important in an institution, in a government in almost all of these countries, is not the name of the institution or what it's set up to do, but who's in charge of it, and what they do with the discretionary resources they have under their control. And then the issue of violence that I'll come back to in just a moment. Let me just give a couple of quick pictures, quick graphs that indicate how the communications revolution has really reshaped this. This is what communications would look like a generation ago. You would have one hub, its capital city, Addis Ababa, Khartoum, and communication from all the provinces would only go to that one place. If you were sitting at the centre of power, you were basically the centre of the spider's web, and you were in charge of all this information coming in, and you could bargain individually, separately, with each one of your clients. With the growth of transport and communication around the peripheries, it becomes much more complicated. The peripheries can communicate with each other, tactically at any rate, and with external patrons. The market becomes a lot more competitive. It's a lot more challenging to stay on top of it. Now, just a final few remarks on violence, and then one or two policy takeaways. On violence, the role of violence in the political market is really the role of signalling. The primary role is the signalling and bargaining. It's a tool for that. The leader of a newly emergent group will attack a police station, shoot up a few trucks in order to say, we're here. We need to, you need to take some account of us. And the government will respond with some violence. We'll go and kill a lot of men, burn some villages, steal some cattle, rape a lot of women to say, no, you're not valuable. Your price is not. And they will fight like this. But at the same time, they will talk. And the role of violence is as an index of seriousness in bargaining. And that's something very concerning, and it has, and the value of human life and the value of human relations and the gender component of this are obviously issues of very, very major concern. But at the same time, what you see in the more efficient and more integrated, more advanced political markets, such as Somalia from the mid-90s until quite recently, such as Northern Sudan, such as Chad, is an elite truce. The members of the elite do not kill each other. By the same token that today's friend can be tomorrow's enemy, today's enemy can be tomorrow's friend. And there's and this is Mariel DeVoe, an anthropologist who worked in Chad, which is a very advanced political market. And she worked among the military entrepreneurs, the middle-level commanders of militias and the army. And you find members of the same group, often the same family, on different sides in the war, different factions. And she says, war belongs to politics, and violence derives from the situation being what is happening at that time, be it armed conflict or some political dispute. There's no radical enmity. People do not hate each other. They fight because the circumstance, the way that politics is configured at that moment means that there is a violent dispute. They're enemies because of war. They don't fight war because they're enemies. And it's interesting, and I'm going to show a graph from Darfur of this. It's really, Darfur is very interesting because you had 2003, 2004, this massive spike in violence, this massive, campaign by the government of Sudan, which caused, probably 30,000 civilian fatalities by violence and many tens of thousands of more through hunger and disease, followed by this long period of 8 or so years of actually rather low level of violence, in which all these elite groups were reshuffling. Violence was being used during this period not to eradicate groups, but simply to signal presence and purely as ancillary to positioning in the political market. Around this time, we had a new surge associated with the attempts with the proxy war between Sudan and South Sudan and the South Sudanese wanting to, for different reasons, to take on the government in Khartoum. Now, why already by 2003, Sudan was quite an advanced political market. So why did we get this spike in violence? Why did we get that massive explosion that was the mass atrocities? The US government called it a genocide in Darfur. You ask the people responsible and they'll say, it was a mistake. It was an error. What happened basically was there were political solutions on offer for the disputes in Darfur within the logic of the marketplace. And for a couple of reasons. Those in key positions, the business managers in Khartoum, didn't take those chances. They made mistakes. They got the price wrong. And then the violence very, very quickly spiraled out of control. Then the logic of violence. Violence in the marketplace is a currency whose value can only be known when it actually happens. And it's very dangerous. It gets out of control. And they don't like it. As they get more in control, you get non-zero levels of violence. You get really quite nasty levels of violence, but you don't get those major atrocities at that scale. In fact, historically, looking at the Horn of Africa, the violence has really been in decline over the last 30 years. The major violence you see was associated with the modernist projects of state building and of revolution in the 1970s and 1980s. And when those passed into history, violence has been much less. Even the violence in South Sudan today is less than what was seen some 20 or 30 years ago. So, dystopian, I don't think so. I think there are aspects to this way of organising political life that we need to recognise and work with. And a more efficient political market, a still more efficient one would, I think, be considerably less violent. So let me just leave with some policy takeaways on this, and I'll just point to three. One is that this is a system run on the basis of money, and where you get resources coming in at the top, rental resources coming in either from oil sales or from security corporation coming in, being poured into the top of these systems, then the systems become more turbulent, more violent. So, number one, be very cautious about putting resources into these systems. Especially, be very cautious about large amounts of money going to counter-terrorism or peacekeeping. They can have untoward effects. The second one is, it's great to see corruption on the agenda. And a lot of what I've been talking about would conventionally be called corruption. But the corruption lens doesn't tell you everything. The cause of the war in South Sudan was not so much corruption as the mismanagement of corruption. And we need, of course, none of us wants corruption. We don't want to tolerate corruption. But well-managed corruption is better than poorly managed corruption. Because poorly managed corruption leads to war. And the third is, let's look at control of political finance. This is something that really we could study quite carefully. And here I want to end with a picture of Somaliland, the one place I haven't discussed. Because I think the secret of the stability of Somaliland lies in the fact that those in charge of finance were able to dictate the terms of the political deal. The agreement in 1993 in Somaliland was, I'd like to caricature it as a profit-sharing agreement amongst the mercantile classes of Somaliland. Appendix A, Constitution of the Republic. It's the very old-fashioned way of getting to a state, is have it as the executive committee of the bourgeoisie, in the words of Marx. And this is the Somaliland Parliament that has held a series of very democratic, very fair elections over the years. And if you look carefully, you will notice that the bundles of currency that you see on the streets of Hargeisa, with the money changers there, and not a gun in sight, are actually the same ones on the cover of the book. So money there has a slightly ambivalent role in the story that I would like to tell.
Questions, but I always like the author to start with a few words about your writing process. Students here like to understand that their professors suffer also.
I agonized a lot over this book actually because I kept thinking I wanted to write a much more theoretical book, and then I thought actually that is just too ambitious. So let me write about what I know about and scale it back to, as it were, tell the story of what I know about, and then hopefully that will help inspire others. I guess the first step was scaling back on the ambition and starting from experience. And I don't know how many drafts I went through. I think 21 drafts or something. It was not a quick process, and actually, 21
drafts. Enough said. Other questions?
Sir, it seemed when you were talking about scoping the Horn of Africa, you very purposely left out Djibouti. I was wondering what your thought was in that, given the really important bilateral relationships Djibouti has with the countries you talked about, and also being a prime example of where we, U.S. government, dump a lot of money into that country.
Yeah. Shall I take questions in bunches of three? I think that's usually... Anybody else? Or
your final comments on Somaliland and the sort of mercantile class coming together has reminded me a little bit of the corporatist tradition that we find sort of in Northern Europe. And I was wondering, perhaps I'm understanding this incorrectly, or if you could maybe talk a little about that, if that's grounded in that at all.
I guess my question is, if we take the political marketplace to its logical conclusion, then what, and if we see the state as a consensus of the bourgeoisie in some senses, then what is the role of inequality in stoking further, if in stoking future rounds of conflict? Is there one at all?
Okay. 3 questions. Djibouti, first of all. Djibouti is flush with money. I mean, Djibouti has positioned itself as the sort of little, almost like a Singapore, actually, in some ways, of this region. And has gone from being a complete backwater to being not only a military hub for the US and French and others, but also a huge trading hub. And it's capitalized on the fact that after the Ethiopia-Eritrean War, it is now the main access to the sea for Ethiopia, and with the Ethiopian economy growing at 10% per year, there's a lot of business to be done. So Djibouti is or the rulers of Djibouti are in a rather luxurious position of everyone scrambling and wanting to be, have a part of them, and of being able to negotiate amongst patrons who are competitors, because Chinese want to be there, Americans want to be there, etc., etc. So Djibouti is an interesting part of the mix, and it has a territorial dispute with Eritrea, which arose because of the bellicosity of the Eritreans, which was silly. Corporatist tradition of Northern Europe. I think that I'm very reluctant to make too many comparisons across continents and across different historical eras. And when I sort of mention the role of the traders in Somaliland and the positive role they play, I wouldn't want, it's a provocative parallel with what happened particularly in Holland and England in the 17th and 18th centuries. But I wouldn't want to push that too far. But there are some general principles, which is that an executive will always want to get as much financial autonomy as it can from its financiers, and if it can do that by having the sovereign privilege of getting international aid and military cooperation and loans, it will. And I think one of the reasons why Somaliland has done so well is precisely because it hasn't been internationally recognized. So the government has been very much entirely reliant on domestic finance, and by domestic I include remittances, because the remittances are the Somalis themselves, rather than on external grants. What is the role of inequality? The fact that a political marketplace gets more perfect doesn't mean that political projects get abandoned or political grievances get abandoned. And what it does mean is that there are constraints on political activity. There are sort of the rules of political activity constrain what can and cannot be done. So that if in a highly unequal country that is functioning as on the basis of a marketplace, Chad or Northern Sudan, for example, if there are grievances that arise, those grievances may be expressed in idealistic or purely political terms, but it is extraordinarily hard to mobilize politically without following the rules of the marketplace. And there's some tricks that key political actors do to signal that maybe because they don't have the resources to mount an immediate challenge, they're in this for the long haul. So that in Somalia, no Somali has any confidence that any official governing apparatus that's there is going to last more than a few years. You know, they come and go. We all know the international community is not going to stay. Doesn't have what it takes to stay. So who does? Now, if Al-Shabaab comes and commits some conspicuous atrocities, it's burning its bridges. It's basically saying, we're not going in. Because there's no exit for us. We've said we're part of Al-Qaeda. We're part of a different political logic, which actually, and I'll come on to that in a moment, actually has its own market logic. And in many ways, a purer, a simpler market logic than the one that is used by the more secularist Western players. But basically, the rule is that if you want to survive and prosper in this system, you have to play by those rules. Just as in the same way as if you're an ethical business person, you want to found a company that promotes saves the rainforest by producing cosmetics that are fully ethically sourced or whatever. You'll be out of business in a day unless you can turn a profit. You cannot function in these systems without some political budget and without playing those games. Now, one of the interesting things about the radical Islamists is they're much franker about this. The Islamist political finance from the 1970s onwards is absolutely candid about what it's up to, which is buying loyalties and building constituencies using financial and even in the internal correspondence of Al-Qaeda and other of the radical Islamists, that which has been declassified, a lot of it has been captured by people who made public. You see that overwhelmingly the discussion about successes and failures is to do with financial management and the price of oil. And then one of the spins on this is that if you commit terrorist spectaculars, you're standing amongst in the jihadist terrorist marketplace goes up. You're more attractive. You're going to get more recruits internationally, maybe not from the local people who tend to have reservations about mass atrocities, but internationally. And I think analysing Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab through that lens, and indeed any radical political project is quite useful. Isaac was first.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the question that you discussed with Zinawi about whether the marketplace transitions to something else. What are alternative political systems that could potentially arise? What does that process look like? And or is the marketplace a way of describing almost every political system?
So I was actually going to ask you precisely about violent jihadists. You talked about their behavior as patrons. I wonder if they also have behavior as clients, if indeed they belong to the broader marketplace. And you mentioned that, in your view, they have their own market. So how is the relationship between their market and the broader market?
Okay.
Linked a bit to Isaac's question, I want to ask about whether violence was the inevitable signal and what would shift for a different signal to be used. I ask this because the dry World Bank funder of institutions would say, well, all behavioural economists, especially Adam Smith, would say that a market doesn't exist before the government's institutions that regulate it. And so surely we just need to keep funding these institutions to change the calculus and the behaviour in the marketplace. We know that's not true, but is violence the inevitable signal and what could shift that, given the way that behaviour works in a capital market?
Okay. Let me take that one first. Who regulates the market? And I think the answer is not the institutions on the whole. In these countries, and trying to build the institutions as a way of fixing the market is getting the wrong way around. But yes, I mean, one of the intriguing and rather optimistic things I see is the sort of the elite truce, the fact the elites don't kill each other. Unfortunately, it's gone into reverse in Somalia, and I have to say, I think that the US policy of targeted assassination was the beginning of that. And I think that's a mistake. I think you need to keep your elites there because they're the ones you negotiate. And if that elite truce could be widened, then there is every reason to suggest that there could be other ways of signaling. And so, for example, among the Khartoum metropolitan elites who have a very well-regulated marketplace, there are various ways in which they signal non-violent, through demonstrations, through elections, things like that. There are ways of handling that in principle. I don't think the way to that regulation is through building the sort of conventional institutions until you've got those social norms in place. Which sort of brings me to the question of can the market transition to something else, and there's a sense in which every political system is transactional. I mean, I've talked about this in Washington and in London, and people who are in government, in the legislature, they'll say, hey, we do this too. But there's a difference between having elements, even though they may be very strong elements of a political market and transactions within a rule-bound system, and one in which, because of these countries' position in the subordinate position in the global order, those institutions don't count. And what Mellis was trying to do was to protect his country from the pressures of as it were, the raging sea around him. And it was interesting that what he did not want to liberalise, financial sector and the telecoms. And yes, it makes for an authoritarian system, but his view was very strongly, we do the growth first and then we democratise. He said if we democratise when we are in this vulnerable situation where the political class is rent-seeking, then we're finished. And challenged on that. I mean, we had some fairly fierce debates after the 2005 election, which was after which there was some fairly fierce crackdown. He said, we don't have the luxury. National survival is at stake. He said, I recognise what you're saying, he would say, but come back and see this country in 15 years and let's see if we make the right choice. Let's see. But that is my key point is I think there is some truth to the fact that if you want to build a state in a recognisable sense, you need to protect yourself from this, and that does mean building some walls. The violent jihadists and their own market and their integration into other markets. Most of the jihadists. Most of those who, certainly in the Horn, who are political Islamists and jihadists, they're in the grey zone. They're part-time jihadists. For them, that is not the dominant identity. So they are primarily part of as it were, the regular market in that country. It's only quite exceptionally that the group deliberately tries to seal itself off, which is what the leadership of Al-Shabaab did. And even then, it's not at all clear whether they succeeded, because there was such dissension within that group, and there still is. But yours is, it's a fascinating and difficult question, and it's another research project. Okay, there was one at the back, and Mayor and Heidi.
I'm just curious of your views on especially in the economy, on the cultivation of pot in the area and its usage, particularly in the Djibouti, Somalia, Yemen area.
The cultivation of
Pot,
cotton.
the drug.
Cut. Okay. Okay.
And then also, what's your take on the Russian influence in the area as it's been picking up in regards to basing, wanting basing Djibouti and also higher operations, anti-higher operations?
Okay. Okay.
So I'm curious about your view of where does the state fit in this system, not as something that's going to happen 20 years in the future. What does it mean right now? Is it pure fiction? And even if it's fiction, is it a useful fiction? Who subscribes to it? What can we make of it?
Okay. And then, Ali.
Just wondering, I can sort of understand why some might use the word dystopian, because it feels as if it does not evolve, going back to an earlier question, to anything manageable or constructive for the people who live there, other than the elites. In other words, if the people are the sort of tools of the elites, as you showed in that graph, where there's a continuing level of violence in order to signal X or Y, that's not a very pleasant future. What is possible to do by outsiders to influence, or is it better that we all just stay away and let these societies work it out?
Okay, the plat question. To be honest, I haven't studied the economics of plat production and the plat market. All I know is that it's one of my early visits to Ethiopia. I remember waiting at the pre-dawn at Addis Ababa airport for the interminable sort of security checks to get into the airport, etc., to take a flight. Suddenly, these two trucks come screaming up, do a sort of handbrake turns. The gates are open. There's a Hercules plane with its propellers already running, and they're loading bags of cut. And where there's money, even the most tightly controlled system, suddenly it works, which of course is no surprise to anyone. But to be honest, I can't say. I know that the economy of the way in which the cut traders paid off checkpoints, etc., with cut rather than money, etc., contributed to cut as a social problem, etc. It's not an issue that I've really studied. The Russians are definitely taking a proactive role throughout the region. They're definitely interested in being there. They see there's a sense in which they have an obvious interest in the Red Sea, like anybody. They've been talking to the Eritreans about having a presence there. They've been talking to the Sudanese about having rebuilding the Sudanese railways. Everyone now is converging on the Red Sea, and it's actually very interesting how little attention there has been to the Red Sea as an area of strategic interest. There are people who study the Horn of Africa, and there are people who study the Middle East, and they don't tend to talk to each other, and the Red Sea goes right down the middle. Where does the state fit in? The state, in most of these countries, the state is something that, it's like Lewis Carroll hunting the snipe. The moment you get it, it's softly and the snipe vanishes away. It's something that is much more elusive the closer you get. I had the impression when I started working on the mediation. Okay, I'm going to see the president, and I'm going to the heart of state power. There's somebody there who is, to all intents and purposes, running his cabinet, his government, in much the same way as a provincial governor or a village chief runs that system. Or if you go to the African Union, to the summits, and it's really interesting. There are 2 AU summits every year, and just about everyone shows up. It's a tremendous commitment of time from these very, very busy people to come to these summits. And you look at the program, the official program, you think, why are they there? They're not going to be adopting the African telecommunications plan, whatever. But and not much real business gets transacted in the conference chamber outside of these people. The African system of conflict resolution is a peer system. And key actors in this peer system are former heads of state. Because if you're a head of state, who can you confide in? You can't confide in anyone around. You don't trust them, they don't trust you. You can't confide in another head of state. The only person you can really talk to is a retired head of state. And so going to these summits with retired heads of state, you suddenly see the role they play in advising and bringing people together and mediating all sorts of disputes that never see, that rarely see the light of day. And the state is entirely subordinate. It's entirely an instrument, so that some states are clients of others. Some states are even clients of rebel movements. The state in Central African Republic a few years ago was the time of the war between Patese and Bozise. Patese, who was the president, was the junior partner in an alliance with Jean-Pierre Bemba, who was a rebel in Congo. Because Jean-Pierre Bemba had more money. So see Central African Republic right at the bottom of the hierarchy of states. And one of the great successes of Idriss Déby as president of Chad is in his years as president. He took Chad from being right at the bottom to being now they're sort of not exactly a superpower, but a power within the region. So the idea of statehood is entirely very largely secondary to these considerations. What does it do for the people? There is a question. Of course, it's not what we would like, and it's not what we would advocate. It's not necessarily worse than the historic alternative of the modernizing of the revolutionary or the colonial state. It may not be worse than those. It actually tends to be less violent than those. But I think there are things that we can do. And I think the key things that I would see policy makers being able to do are things to do with those elements that would make the market both more efficient and better regulated. So more efficient in terms of communication and mobilization, all the stuff that's done with civil society. You see norms changing. You see people mobilizing and you see that individuals can navigate, can function in this market with elements of personal integrity. The same skill set that can make you a warlord, if you like, can also make you a judge with a high degree of integrity and reputation. You may be taking a bit of money on the side somewhere, but nonetheless you could have a reputation of being incorruptible in court. And there are very interesting cases where, let's say, cases have come to court and the judges have ruled against the government. They're being extremely brave. And the reason why they're able to do that is because they have used their personal networks and resources to build up the societal reputation of personal integrity, which can then be used to challenge those in power. But I think that's not something that we can really contribute to as outsiders, because the skills and the networks, the personal contacts that are needed to do that are something that we would never have. On the other hand, there are one or two key things, and this is why I point to the regulation of political finance in the Somaliland case as being so important. If we're able to bring together those who are funding these systems, which include domestic businessmen, foreign investors, oil companies, Pentagon, etc., European Union, and say, let's keep frank. We may think we're building institutions, we're also pumping a lot of political money into this. Now, we don't want to be accused of corruption, so let's find another terminology. for what we're actually doing, and see if we can regulate, if we can find a collusive mechanism for regulating political finance in these countries in such a way that it lends itself to greater stability in the conduct of politics. That, I think, is a very doable policy takeaway, albeit at a high level generally. I think we probably have time for maybe 2 more.
Following up on very interesting question, Professor Babbitt's about what can be done from the outside and the question about the state. In the 70s and 80s, which you alluded to as a period of state building, when that was very much a focus of policy, there was a man who had been in the Peace Corps in Somalia named Thomas Petra, who became a congressman. And this was the period when Somalia really did not have a functioning state. It was a period of Colonel Aidid and the technicals and warlords and the village heads and so on. And what he proposed was that workers for international organizations, including the UN, the various aid agencies, even NGOs, would pay an income tax into an escrow account. Who would hold that, I don't know, but it would have to be some institution in the international community. I mean, maybe even something independently created for that purpose. And that was to create a sort of a nest egg, so to speak, so that if these players in the marketplace were able to work out some kind of equilibrium, there would be sufficient resources there to make it worthwhile for them to run the state in a somewhat harmonious way. Now, what you've described is that the amount of money involved is so much greater now, owing to piracy and arms trade and cot dealers and so on, that maybe a solution like that, which was really more ingenious, I think, than it was really practical, nonetheless suggests a way in which conceivably the world outside could actually become a player in the marketplace without having to side with one side or the other, or to pay a bride which might be called something else, whether it comes from a company or something else, such that there would be sufficient resources at the center, held in position as a kind of attraction, so you could come back to your starting point, which was to describe the Horn of Africa, with Somalia, and now Somaliland, with Ethiopia, with Djibouti, and so on. These boundaries are on the map, and it would provide a way, possibly, of at least maintaining that structure, which even the African Union can't do better than. So I guess my question would be, do you see a way in which the state, I don't mean particularly an individual government, but just a kind of collective state, could find some kind of instrument such that it itself could become a player in the political marketplace which you described, so it's not just simply left to the warlords or others?
No.
I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the size of the political budgets and where they come from in terms of, like, compared to the budget that they're operating with. And if we look at South Sudan and we see the incredible growth in the military, as where that money comes from and what it doesn't go to. I think of South Sudan and just the abysmal health conditions and the highest maternal mortality rate in the world. And I wonder about that, and then at the same time I wonder, how would women in these completely patriarchal, male-dominated systems, how would women signal that they're a player? Aren't they the ones being raped and mutilated and their homes being burned down? And, I don't see how they ever get a voice in such a system, which it seems like the political budgets are also just gutting the systems that keep them alive. Or not, contribute to more and more effects.
Okay, I will take these two and then I think we'll conclude. I think the key issue in being a player in the political marketplace is what kind of player. Because actually, international actors are already players, except they're just not very good at it. We tend to be playing. Okay. We come in and we say, we've got all this money for capacity building, for building a ministry of this or that. Oh yes, isn't that wonderful? And we tend to focus on an institution as it exists at that time. Okay, let's say there's a wonderful governor of the central bank or a wonderful minister of health. That individual will attract a lot of money. But it's a bubble of integrity within a system that is fundamentally not a system of integrity. And the moment that individual is transferred, that bubble is pricked, someone else comes in and we think, oh my God, what are we going to do? All our investment then falls away. Or in South Sudan is a great example. A lot of money was poured into the security sector in South Sudan with the aim of reforming, with the aim of demobilizing, downsizing it, reforming it, professionalizing it. It was all stolen. All of it. In fact, I have a South Sudanese student who used to be an auditor there who said they did the remarkable job of stealing more than was in the official budget itself. It never comes to that. So we tend to get paid. So how could we be a better player? Now the Somalia case is an interesting one in that what is happening is the European Union, which is financing most of it, basically wants to come in and be the biggest government. But it's actually, size does not translate into adroitness in working the system. Because they are, all the different bits of the international engagement in Somalia are ending up being manipulated one way or the other. Apart from when you get a really resolute actor like the CIA comes in and says, we're going to run the National Intelligence and Security Agency and it's going to do this, this and this. And it doesn't. But it doesn't build a state, it just does particular actions or particular anti-piracy actions or anti-terrorist actions or whatever. What I think might be possible would be to think about having sort of an umpire, having a role there of being a player with a reputation for just staying power and integrity that everything begins to revolve around. And I noticed this in the role that Thabo Mbeki was playing between Sudan and South Sudan, and indeed within Sudan, in that he basically said, this is going to take a long time, okay? And we're going to get buffeted, we're going to get insulted, we're going to get bruised. We're not going to say anything about that. People are going to blame us for everything. But if we stay there long enough, they'll recognize that the only way they can get us on side is by doing the right thing. And playing it long in that way, with backed up by resources, and communicating very clearly and consistently a set of positions as a sort of taking the role of a mediator, not as a task, but as a long-term role as a sort of layer in governance. Because de facto, there is in all these countries, not just in the Horn but elsewhere, there is an international layer of governance that is there to stay. And we pretend that it's only there on the short term. But let's maybe be realistic and say, okay, it's there to stay. Let's treat it as though we're going to be there for the next 50 years. And we're going to have a very simple set of institutions that will persist and have certain principles. And then let's see. Size of the political budgets. By definition, it's extraordinarily difficult actually to measure these things. South Sudan, though, is probably the simplest case because basically everything went in, and it was all oil money until very recently. It was all oil money, went straight in, and was a political budget. And actually, I'm now regretting we did a little cartoon history of South Sudan with a cartoon picture of the oil pipeline coming in and dollar bills gushing out, and President Salva Kiir handing them out to various people who were making various claims. And basically the entirety of the national budget was used for political ends, primarily to pay the army, or primarily to pay the officer corps of the army, because a lot of it didn't actually reach the army. A lot of the army didn't actually exist. And it was just being pocketed. And then, tiny percentages, 2-3%, was going to health and education. And in fact, most of the health budget was being run by international donors, so that in South Sudan, despite being on governmental spending, being a middle-income country, having spending that was far more than its neighbours, the performance on the basic health and things was zero. So in a situation like South Sudan, how can women signal their presence? It's remarkably difficult. It's not easy at all. And I think all we can hope for is an overall increase in civility in that system, in those systems, because the interesting thing about the dystopian nature of the South Sudanese system is that it is so dysfunctional. It doesn't work as it is actually crashing around the ears of the men who set it up and ran it. If you have a more functional, then actually then it is more civil. And the more and the greater the functionality, the greater the civility, and the greater the standing of women. So if you go to a metropolitan Khartoum, you'll find that half the women enrolled in higher education, more than half the women. You'll find greater female employment is pushing that of men. They're not there in the higher echelons of the government, but you see them creeping up. It's difficult but not impossible.
So, well, thank you very much for being here. There might be a little more coffee. I don't know if there's cookies. And also to remind you that there are copies of the book being sold at the Farah Center for discount. $16.
$16,
discount.
which
I
is
apologize. The library copies will be here for a week, so but they'll arrive on the 15th, I'm told. But the holidays are just around the corner, right? Thank you very much. Thank you.